100 years ago, people were already aware of certain mysterious ancient animals. Again and again, evidence of a much earlier Germany surfaced, a place inhabited by strange creatures. This was just such a find from those prehistoric times. Bone from a legendary animal. The age of the dinosaur had dawned. They would now call the shots for the next 150 million years. Compared to its later relations, the Pleistocene was a featherweight. Yet this herbivore was still too heavy for the damp, muddy ground of the swamplands that had spread over the area bit by bit. The thick, gooey silt swallowed them up like quicksand. In modern times, so many of the long necks were unearthed here that they were nicknamed Swabian lintworms after the local region. These creatures marked the beginning of the story of the dinosaurs. The bone was only the tip of the iceberg. This collision put an end to the age of the dinosaurs. The crash hurled huge amounts of dust into the Earth's atmosphere. The sun was hidden for months on end. Temperatures dropped significantly. More than half of all species were wiped out. Scientific debate over whether the meteorite strike alone caused the dinosaurs' demise will most likely rage on and on. But one thing is certain: the time for the mammals had come. In the shadow of the dinosaurs, the first mammals appeared, little unassuming creatures. With the giant reptiles out of the picture, the way was now clear for them. Forest elephants now lived where mammoth had previously grazed, and roe deer and wild boar came along to take the place of reindeer. The animals migrated in accordance with the changing climate. But something significant had changed. The animals were no longer alone. The extinguished fire mountains in the Eifel region of Germany can reignite at any moment, as can the supervolcanoes of Italy. No one can say if it will be in 10,000 years or next Tuesday. The last time the Maria Laach volcano erupted, the result was destruction of unimaginable proportions. The ash spread as far as southern Sweden and northern Italy. For several days, avalanches of hot lava and ash barreled through the valleys, creating an almost 30-meter-high wall that dammed up the Rhine and Mosel rivers for weeks on end. When the dam finally burst, a gigantic torrent of floodwater went crashing downstream, all the way to the Netherlands, laying waste to everything in its path. Long before this devastation, an ancestor of today's human beings had lived throughout a large part of Europe and the Middle East. Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthal. More than 200,000 years ago, this species of human had already developed in Europe. In the coldest periods, the advancing glaciers had forced the Neanderthal to up sticks and move on. Finally, however, the species succeeded in adapting to the cold. The Neanderthal was long assumed to have been inferior to modern man in almost every way. Not so. Neanderthals knew how to find the safest hideouts and the best hunting grounds. They were skillful craftsmen. They tanned hides and fashioned clothing out of leather and fur. The Neanderthals lived in small clans, scattered across a large area. But even in the forests of the warmer periods, survival wasn't easy. The dense woods were home not only to deer, rhinoceros, and forest elephants, but to lions and hyenas as well. As the climate changed, so too did the habitat. But the Neanderthals continued to adapt and survive. Nothing is known about their language, but the anatomy of their throat reveals they would certainly have been able to communicate vocally. Their hunting implements were already far more advanced than those of Homo heidelbergensis. They used a sort of glue made of birch tar to fasten their knife-sharp flint blades to their spears, a brilliant invention. Evidence shows that Neanderthals cared for their sick and buried their dead. There is still much speculation over why they eventually vanished from the face of the earth 30,000 years ago. We were long thought to descend from the victors over these primitives, but apparently not all encounters between the two were hostile. The fact is, we do share a portion, albeit a small one, of our genetic material with them. The Neanderthal lives on within us. For the last time to date, a great cold period had northern Europe in its grip. Now the wolves and the large grazers, mammoth, musk oxen, and reindeer wandered in their millions over the wide open spaces. At the foot of the glaciers, a constant wind swept across the land. It was the northernmost outpost of life. When the cold here got too severe, the herds had to move on. The wolves were always hot on their heels. And they weren't the only ones following the herds. In the midst of the cold period, human beings immigrated from the African savanna to what is now Central Europe. For days on end, the hunter roamed the ice desert, searching for fresh meat for his clan. Wolves were among the first wild animals that humans not only hunted, but domesticated as well. The life of the hunters was dictated by the migration of the herds. As the animals changed feeding grounds, the human predators, too, repeatedly moved camp along the great migration routes. In the summertime, the open steppe was a fruitful hunting ground, but it was almost impossible to track animals in winter, when the snow and wind covered their trail, and they disappeared against the white backdrop. Every year, the hunters waited for their prey to pass by on migration. But the great herds slowly began to disappear, never to return again. Some species went completely extinct. Others left the land of the Ice Age hunters. For a long time, human beings took the rap for the disappearance of the mammoth and the megalosaurus. But the handful of hunters can't be responsible for the extinction of these species. Rising temperatures seemed the more plausible answer for the animal's demise. After the end of the last ice age, the climate warmed up very quickly. The forest returned, and along with it, the animals we still know today. The people, who up until this time had been nomadic hunter-gatherers, now began to settle and shape their environment. But as human civilization took its baby steps, entirely new conflicts arose. Wildlife was no longer just a food source. For a farmer tending her fields at the dawn of agriculture, deer were pests to be driven off. For the hunters, the farmers and their fields were alien intruders. They chopped down the forests and disrupted the hunting grounds. Agriculture, however, won through in the end. With what is known as the Neolithic Revolution, mankind began a targeted campaign of adapting nature to its own needs. Villages and later cities were built, and the population grew apace, because people were no longer dependent on what they could hunt and gather, but could now produce their own nutrition. The wildlife avoided human settlements, retreating ever deeper into the forests. Mankind repeatedly carves out a place for itself in nature. Until the early 19th century, wood was the most commonly used material, and practically the only heating material. Entire regions were deforested. By this time, the bears were almost all gone. Since the Middle Ages, the forest had been used as a grazing pasture, and the leaves blanketing the forest floor were cleared to use as straw in the stalls of livestock. Wood and charcoal supplied the energy to fire the ovens of the salt, iron, and glass industries. More and more charcoal burners and piles were set up to produce wood charcoal, huge amounts of which was needed to feed the booming nascent industries. Where wood supplies ran low, communities and cities passed laws to protect the forests. Nobility, too, took action against the deforestation. The landed gentry laid claim to huge forest areas and took measures for forest and wildlife conservancy, but not from ecological conviction. The hunting classes wanted to save their stately game reserves from destruction. Without the sport, hunting of the titled toffs, the German countryside would look a lot different today. For millennia, the hunt was an existential necessity for human existence. But in the early Middle Ages, it became a privilege. Nobility passed an edict over its forests. The farmers were not only prohibited from hunting, they were not even allowed to kill the game when it was caught plundering the harvest in the fields. At that time, there was a law that revoked the land rights of the peasantry as soon as the trees and shrubs on it grew high enough to reach a rider's spurs. Nowadays, the hunt not only serves to control the game population, it's also a popular recreational activity.